Intelligent design is not creation science either. Intelligent design scientists don't make claims that so-called creation scientists make. They don't say that the data unambiguously supports the 624-hour-day view of Genesis, or a worldwide flood. Instead, they acknowledge that the data for intelligent design is not based on a specific age or geologic history of the Earth. ID scientists study the same objects in nature that the Darwinists study, life and the universe itself, but they come to a more reasonable conclusion about the cause of those objects. In short, regardless of what the Bible may say on the topic, Darwinism is rejected because it doesn't fit the scientific data, and intelligent design is accepted because it does. Objection. Intelligent design is false because the so-called design isn't perfect. Answer. Darwinists have long argued that if a designer existed, he would have designed his creatures better. Stephen Jay Gould pointed this out in his book, The Panda's Thumb, where he cited the apparent suboptimal design of a bony extrusion pandas have for a thumb. The problem for the Darwinists is that this actually turns out to be an argument for a designer rather than an argument against one. First, the fact that Gould can identify something as suboptimal design implies that he knows what optimal design is. You can't know something is imperfect unless you know what perfect is. So Gould's observation of even suboptimal design implies an admission that design is detectable in the panda's thumb. By the way, this is another reason the Darwinists are wrong when they assert that intelligent design is not science. When they claim something isn't designed correctly, they are implying that they could tell if it were designed correctly. This proves what ID scientists have been saying all along. ID is science because design is empirically detectable. Second, suboptimal design doesn't mean there's no design. In other words, even if you grant that something is not designed optimally, that doesn't mean it's not designed at all. Your car isn't designed optimally, yet it's still designed. It certainly wasn't put together by natural laws. Third, in order to say that something is suboptimal, you must know what the objectives or purpose of the designer are. If Gould doesn't know what the designer intended, then he can't say the design falls short of those intentions. How does Gould know the panda's thumb isn't exactly what the designer had in mind? Gould assumes the panda should have opposable thumbs like those of humans. But maybe the designer wanted the panda's thumbs to be just like they are. After all, the panda's thumb works just fine in allowing him to strip bamboo down its edible interior. Maybe pandas don't need opposable thumbs because they don't need to write books like Gould. They simply need to strip bamboo. Gould can't fault the designer of that thumb if it wasn't intended to do more than strip bamboo. Finally, in a world constrained by physical reality, all design requires trade-offs. Laptop computers must strike a balance between size, weight, and performance. Larger cars may be more safe and comfortable, but they also are more difficult to maneuver and consume more fuel. High ceilings make rooms more dramatic, but they also consume more energy. Because trade-offs cannot be avoided in this world, engineers must look for a compromise position that best achieves intended objectives. For example, you can't fault the design in a compact car because it doesn't carry 15 passengers. The objective is to carry 4, not 15 passengers. The car maker traded size for fuel economy and achieved the intended objective. Likewise, it could be that the design of the panda's thumb is a trade-off that still achieves intended objectives. The thumb is just right for stripping bamboo. Perhaps if the thumb had been designed any other way, it would have hindered the panda in some other area. We simply don't know without knowing the objectives of the designer. What we do know is that Gould's criticisms cannot succeed without knowing those objectives. So why are there still Darwinists? If the evidence is so strong for intelligent design, then why are there still Darwinists? After all, these people are not dummies. Their names are usually followed by the letters PhD. The first thing to note is that this is not just an intellectual issue, where Darwinists take a dispassionate look at the evidence and then make a rational conclusion. Richard Dawkins has famously written, "It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that." Of course, Dawkins' comment is simply false. There are brilliant PhDs who believe in intelligent design. But the real question is, why the invectives? Why the emotion? Why the hostility? I thought this was science. There must be something else at stake here. There is. Let's go back to Richard Lewontin's quote from the last chapter. Recall his assertion that Darwinists believe in the absurdities they do because materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Now, that's the real issue. Keeping God out. But why would Darwinists not want a divine foot in the door? We suggest 4 major reasons. First, by admitting God, Darwinists would be admitting that they are not the highest authority when it comes to truth. Currently, in this technologically advanced world, scientists are viewed by the public as the revered authority figures, the new priests who make a better life possible, and who comprise the sole source of objective truth. Allowing the possibility of God would be to relinquish their claim of superior authority. Second, by admitting God, Darwinists would be admitting that they don't have absolute authority when it comes to explaining causes. In other words, if God exists, they couldn't explain every event as the result of predictable natural laws. Richard Lewontin put it this way: to appeal to an omnipotent deity is to allow that any moment the regularities of nature may be ruptured, that miracles may happen. As Jastrow noted, when that happens, the scientist has lost control, certainly to God, and perhaps to the theologian. Third, by admitting God, Darwinists would risk losing financial security and professional admiration. How so? Because there's tremendous pressure in the academic community to publish something that supports evolution. Find something important, and you may find yourself on the cover of National Geographic or the subject of a PBS special. Find nothing, and you may find yourself out of a job, out of grant money, or at least out of favor with your materialist colleagues. So there is a money, job security, and prestige motive to advance the Darwinian worldview. Finally, and perhaps the most significantly, by admitting God, Darwinists would be admitting that they don't have the authority to define right and wrong for themselves. By ruling out the supernatural, Darwinists can avoid the possibility that anything is morally prohibited. For if there is no God, everything is lawful, as a character in a Dostoevsky novel observed. We'll elaborate on the connection between God and morality in the next chapter. In fact, the late Julian Huxley, once a leader among Darwinists, admitted that sexual freedom is a popular motivation behind evolutionary dogma. When he was asked by talk show host Merv Griffin, "Why do people believe in evolution?" Huxley honestly answered, "The reason we accepted Darwinism, even without proof, is because we didn't want God to interfere with our sexual mores." Notice he didn't cite evidence for spontaneous generation or evidence from the fossil record. The motivation he observed to be prevalent among evolutionists was based on moral preferences, not scientific evidence. Former atheist Lee Strobel reveals that he had the same motivation when he believed in Darwinism. He writes, "I was more than happy to latch onto Darwinism as an excuse to jettison the idea of God, so I could unabashedly pursue my own agenda in life without moral constraints." Author and lecturer Ron Carlson has had Darwinists admit the same to him. On one such occasion, after lecturing at a major university on the problems with Darwinism and the evidence for intelligent design, Carlson had dinner with a biology professor who had attended his presentation. "So what did you think of my lecture?" Carlson asked. "Well, Ron," began the professor, "what you say is true and makes a lot of sense, but I'm going to continue to teach Darwinism anyway." Carlson was baffled. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "Well, to be honest with you, Ron, it's because Darwinism is morally comfortable." "Morally comfortable? What do you mean? Carlson pressed. I mean, if Darwinism is true, if there is no God and we all evolved from slimy green algae, then I can sleep with whomever I want, observed the professor. In Darwinism, there's no moral accountability. Now that's a moment of complete candor. Of course, this is not to say that all Darwinists think this way, or that all Darwinists are immoral. Some undoubtedly live morally better lives than many so-called Christians. It simply reveals that some Darwinists are motivated not by the evidence, but rather by a desire to remain free from the perceived moral restraints of God. This motivation may drive them to suppress the evidence for the Creator, so they can continue to live the way they want to live. In this sense, Darwinism is no different than many other world religions in that it provides a way to deal with the guilt that results from immoral behavior. The difference is that some Darwinists, instead of acknowledging guilt and offering ways to atone for it, or rules to avoid it, attempt to avoid any implication of guilt by asserting that there's no such thing as immoral behavior to be guilty about. These four motivations that we've suggested should not surprise us. Sex and power are the motivators that underlie many of our most intense cultural debates, such as those about abortion and homosexuality. Too often people take positions in those debates that merely line up with their personal desires, rather than taking the evidence into account. In the same way, belief in Darwinism is often a matter of the will rather than the mind. Sometimes people refuse to accept what they know to be true because of the impact it will have on their personal lives. This explains why some Darwinists suggest that absurd, counterintuitive explanations that are against common sense. Despite the plain evidence for design, these Darwinists fear an encroachment of God into their personal lives more than they fear being wrong about their scientific conclusions. This is not to say that all Darwinists have such motivations for their beliefs. Some may truly believe that the scientific evidence supports their theory. We think they get this misconception because most Darwinists rarely study the research of those in other fields. As a result, very few get the big picture. This is especially true of biologists. Molecular and cell biologist Jonathan Wells observes, most biologists are honest, hard-working scientists who insist on accurate presentation of the evidence, but who rarely venture outside their own fields. In other words, although they do honest work, they only see their own piece of the puzzle. Since they've been taught that the Darwinian box top of the puzzle is generally true, it's just those pesky details that remain unresolved. Most biologists interpret their piece of the puzzle with that box top in mind, giving the benefit of the doubt to the Darwinian view, and assuming that the really strong evidence for Darwinism lies in another field of biology. So even if they can't see the evidence for spontaneous generation or macroevolution in their piece of the puzzle, the evidence must be somewhere else in biology because the Darwinian box top requires those things to be true. These circumstances leave the evolutionary paradigm unchallenged by the majority of biologists. How important is the age of the universe? We couldn't leave the discussion of evolution and creation without at least mentioning the age of the universe. Since there are several views on this topic, especially within Christian circles, we do not have space to treat them all here. They are discussed in detail in the Baker Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics and Systematic Theology, Volume 2. However, we do want to point out that while the age of universe is certainly an interesting theological question, the more important point is not when the universe was created, but that it was created. As we have seen, the universe exploded into being out of nothing, and it has been precisely tweaked to support life on Earth. Since this universe, including the entire time-space continuum, had a beginning, it required a beginner no matter how long ago that beginning was. Likewise, since this universe is designed, it required a designer no matter how long ago it was designed. We can debate how long the days in Genesis were, or whether the assumptions that are made in dating techniques are valid. But when we do, we must be sure not to obscure the larger point that this creation requires a creator. Summary and conclusion. Now let's get to the bottom line. There are really only two possibilities. Either God created us, or we created God. Either God really exists, or he's just a creation of our own minds. As we have seen, Darwinism, not God, is a creation of the human mind.